I'm Rachel Carter, 36 years old, standing under the Texas sun while the smell of barbecue and judgment hangs in the air. You're 36, Rachel. When will you get your life together? Dad calls out, flipping burgers as the family laughs politely. My sister Madeline beams, announcing she's interviewing at NovaTech next week, expecting me to clap for her. But tomorrow, she'll walk into that interview and find me sitting at the head of the table. Before I tell you what happened next, have you ever kept your success a secret just to see who people really are? I adjusted the strap of my simple navy dress, feeling every pair of eyes flick toward me as I closed the gate behind me. The Carter family barbecue was always the same, a gathering that looked perfect from the outside, complete with fresh-cut grass folding chairs in neat rows and iced tea sweating on the tables. Dad Henry Carter stood by the grill, tongs in hand, wearing the same faded Astros cap he wore every year. He was 65 now, still sharp, still opinionated, still certain he knew what was best for everyone else. "Rachel, glad you made it," he called over, but his eyes didn't smile. He flipped a burger, then glanced at me again, studying the dress I'd bought at a clearance sale last week, making sure it was respectable enough to avoid Mom's passive-aggressive comments. Mom Linda, 63, came out from the kitchen carrying a tray of deviled eggs, the kind she always made for these gatherings, the kind she pretended were just a little something, even though we all knew she'd spent the morning arranging the paprika just right. "Oh, Rachel, there you are," she said, her smile tight, her eyes already darting past me to see if I'd brought anyone this time. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, Dad spoke up again, his voice loud enough for the cousins clustered by the fence to hear. "You're 36 now, Rachel," he said, flipping a burger with a loud sizzle. "When are you going to settle down? Get a real plan for yourself." Silence spread across the yard like a spill, seeping into the small conversations happening around us. I felt the eyes, the pity, the smirks hidden behind polite sips of lemonade. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and nodded, pretending the words didn't land like small cuts. The truth was, I'd been preparing for this moment the entire drive over, reminding myself to keep my face calm, to let them believe what they wanted to believe. Madeline stepped forward, then her blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun that screamed success. At 34, she was everything they wanted me to be: a lawyer with a perfect record, living in a polished condo downtown with a boyfriend who worked in finance. She cleared her throat, smiling as she looked at Dad, at Mom, at the circle of relatives who leaned in as if on cue. "I have some news," she announced, pausing with the confidence of someone used to attention. "I have an interview next week for a senior position at NovaTech Legal Solutions." The name dropped into the space like a stone into water, sending ripples through the family. Uncle Roy, holding a beer, let out a low whistle. Aunt Jenny clapped her hands together softly. Mom's eyes widened and she reached for Madeline's hand, squeezing it with pride that glowed across her face. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," Mom said, her voice warm, filled with a pride I had never seen directed at me. "NovaTech is growing so fast and you'd be perfect there." Madeline smiled, modest but pleased, her eyes flicking toward me for a fraction of a second as if to measure my reaction. I nodded, forcing a small smile, keeping my hands steady around the cup of iced tea I held. Dad chuckled, nodding his approval. "Now that's what I'm talking about. A real company, a real future." I felt their collective gaze shift toward me for a moment, a quick comparison, a reminder of where I stood or where they thought I stood. The air felt heavier, the sun hotter on my skin, but I kept my smile in place, pressing my thumb against the condensation on my cup to ground myself. Madeline turned back to Mom, launching into a detailed description of her application process, the partner who had recommended her, the prep she was doing for the interview. They listened with rapt attention, nodding, adding small comments about how proud they were, how much sense it made for her to take this next step. I took a small sip of my drink, letting the cold slide down my throat, tasting the sweetness, feeling the quiet hum of the backyard around me. I stood there listening, smiling, letting them continue to believe I was the lost one in the family. A breeze moved through the backyard, carrying the scent of grilled onions and smoky ribs, but it couldn't clear the heaviness that settled after Madeline's announcement. She kept talking, her hands moving in practiced gestures, explaining how she planned to structure her answers, how she had already mapped out the company's recent cases to impress the interview panel. Mom nodded, eyes shining, and squeezed Madeline's arm. "That's my girl. Always prepared, always pushing for more." Dad flipped a burger, glancing over with a small, satisfied smirk. You see, Rachel. That's how you move up. Madeline's always thinking ahead. I shifted my weight, feeling the wooden deck press against the soles of my flats. The heat pressed against my back, but I kept my face calm, letting the moment pass without a word. Madeline's laugh rang out clear and confident as she told Mom how NovaTech was expanding rapidly, how getting in now could mean a fast track to partner-level work in a few years. You know, I'm really excited, she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. They're cutting-edge, Mom, really at the front of tech and law. It's the future. I'm so proud of you, honey, Mom said, her voice warm. You always make the right choices. The words were gentle, but they landed between us like a barrier, an invisible reminder of where I stood in this family's eyes. I set my cup down on the patio table, feeling the water ring it left behind, a perfect circle on the glass. Madeline glanced at me, her blue eyes bright, her smile a touch too wide. You'll find something that fits you too, Rach. Maybe a smaller firm or even an office assistant role. You're good with people. The words were meant to sound kind, helpful even, but they cut sharper than if she had stayed silent. I raised my eyebrows, forcing a polite laugh, and nodded. Thanks, Mads. I'll keep that in mind. She didn't notice the edge in my voice, already turning back to Mom to continue her story, describing the outfit she planned to wear for the interview down to the subtle earrings that would say professional without trying too hard. Dad called out burgers are ready in that booming voice he used when he wanted to change the subject. Plates and hands moved quickly, paper napkins fluttering the air, filled with the clatter of tongs against the tray. I took a plate, moving down the line, squeezing mustard onto a bun, listening to the hum of conversation around me. I heard NovaTech just signed something big with one of those space companies, Uncle Roy said, leaning in toward Madeline. SpaceX, yeah, Madeline replied, her voice lifting with excitement. They're doing legal structuring for their satellite expansions. It's exactly the kind of company I want to be with. I took a bite of my burger, chewing slowly, letting the words swirl around me. The irony was thick, but I swallowed it down with the taste of grilled beef and mustard, keeping my expression calm. They're lucky to even get her in the door, Dad said, wiping his hands with a napkin. Not many people can keep up with Madeline. Mom laughed softly, touching Dad's arm. She's always had a bright future. The words rolled over me, each one a small wave of dismissal I let wash past. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. A message from Thomas, my COO, confirming the meeting with SpaceX was finalized for Monday. I locked the screen, slipping the phone back into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the fabric as I closed my eyes for half a second. Madeline's voice rang out again. Rachel, are you even listening? She laughed, tossing her hair back. We were just saying maybe you'll finally find something that sticks this year. The laughter that followed was light, but I felt the burn behind my ribs, the way the words hit a place that used to hurt but no longer did. I smiled, letting my eyes rest on hers. Maybe I will. She nodded, satisfied, turning back to Dad, who had started explaining how he'd gotten the grill to the perfect temperature for the burgers. I stepped back, letting the voices of my family fill the space, letting them continue their stories, their assumptions, their pride. The sun was dipping lower now, turning the sky a warm gold as it caught the edges of the fence. I took another sip of my drink, letting the cold slide down, grounding myself in the moment. They could keep believing I was the lost one, the disappointment, the sister who couldn't quite figure it out. Because in a few days Madeline would walk through the glass doors of NovaTech, resume in hand, confidence in her step, ready to claim the future she believed was hers. And she would see me sitting at the head of the table waiting. Most people assumed I was drifting through life, hopping between ideas that never went anywhere, another restless soul who couldn't settle. They didn't know about the nights in that tiny one-bedroom apartment in Plano, the glow of my laptop lighting up the cracked paint on the walls as I coded until my eyes burned. I lived on ramen noodles and cold coffee, hair pulled back, fingers stiff from typing, pushing through the fear that maybe they were right, maybe I was throwing everything away. The first year after I dropped out of law school, I felt the weight of their disappointment, even hundreds of miles away. Mom's tight voice on the phone, Dad's silence, the way Madeline never asked me about my plans. But as I taught myself how to build algorithms, how to structure code, how to think like a machine, a different kind of hope started to bloom. It was small at first, like a spark in a dark room. I would scribble ideas on sticky notes, pasting them on the wall until the cheap paint couldn't hold them anymore, mapping out a system that could change how the legal world processed documents. No one in my family would have believed me if I told them I was building something that could scan thousands of pages, sort, categorize, and highlight key clauses in hours instead of weeks. I didn't tell them. Instead, I took Mom's maiden name Hayes and filed the paperwork myself for a small LLC. NovaTech Legal Solutions was born at 3 in the morning over a mug of cold coffee with me whispering to myself that it would work, that I would make it work. The first clients were small law firms around Texas, the kind that didn't get attention from the bigger tech companies. I offered them a product that was messy, unfinished, but it saved them hours of work. I answered every email, personally fixed bugs at 2 in the morning, and took calls while sitting on the floor with my back against the door when I couldn't afford a proper desk. Then I met Elena Reed. She came to a local tech meetup in Dallas, her sharp eyes taking in the demo I was showing to 3 half-interested lawyers sipping lukewarm coffee. When the others left, she stayed behind, arms crossed, watching me pack up my laptop. "You built that system yourself?" she asked, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of someone used to being heard. "Yes," I said, my voice shaking a little, hoping she couldn't see how thin my confidence really was. "It's rough," she said, looking at me directly. "But it's smart." She handed me her card, told me to call her, and walked away before I could even thank her. 2 weeks later, she wired $500,000 into NovaTech's account, and I could finally hire 2 junior developers to help me fix the system, clean the code, prepare for the clients I was about to chase down. I moved NovaTech from my apartment to a small office in Houston, then to Austin, then New York. Every move felt like tearing off a piece of who I used to be, replacing it with someone who could walk into a room and speak with certainty. Our team grew from 3 to 50, then to 300. I learned how to pitch to investors, to negotiate contracts, to say no without apologizing. I learned how to walk into a boardroom, sit down at the head of the table, and let the silence work for me. Just last week, I signed a $50 million contract with SpaceX to manage and process their expanding legal documents for satellite launches. They shook my hand, called me Miss Hayes, asked me about the vision I had for NovaTech's next 5 years, never once questioning if I was old enough, if I was serious enough. They didn't know the hours I spent coding in the dark, the ramen dinners, the fear. And now, as Forbes prepared to run a feature on NovaTech the morning of Madeline's interview, I could almost hear Dad's voice in my head telling me to get a real job. I smiled to myself, knowing the world would find out before he did. The screen of my phone lit up with a message from Thomas, my COO, confirming the final logistics for the Monday meeting with SpaceX. I typed back quickly, thumb moving fast, approving the agenda and reminding him to keep the team small for the initial tech handoff. I set the phone down, leaning back in the leather chair of my home office, looking out at the Houston skyline glowing under the evening sky. They had no idea. Mom still thought I spent my days answering phones for a tech help desk, scraping by while figuring out what I wanted. Dad still assumed I was drifting, too stubborn to admit I needed structure. Madeline, well, she thought she was the star, the lawyer. Everyone admired the one on track while I was left behind. They didn't know how many nights I'd stayed up reviewing contracts worth more than Dad had made in a decade. They didn't see the conference calls at dawn with clients in London, Tokyo, or the way I had learned to stand in front of a room full of men twice my age and tell them how we would change the legal industry. They didn't know because I chose not to tell them. When I signed the lease on our first real office in Houston, I used Mom's maiden name Hayes on the paperwork, ensuring that if Dad decided to Google me, he wouldn't find a single thing that tied me back. It wasn't spite. It was protection. The first time we hit $1 million in revenue, I celebrated alone with a cheap bottle of champagne in that same tiny apartment, sitting on the floor with my laptop open, answering customer support emails between sips. The day we hired our 50th employee, I called Elena, the woman who believed in me when I was just a girl with a messy pitch deck and tired eyes. "You're not slowing down," Elena said, her voice warm but firm. "Don't forget to breathe, Rachel." "I know," I replied, looking around the new office, empty still but buzzing with potential. Elena had put in $500,000 when NovaTech was nothing but a rough prototype and a dream. She never hovered, never pressured, but she checked in, reminded me to see the bigger picture when I got lost in the daily grind. The day we hit our first big milestone, a small law firm in Austin landed a settlement they credited to our system's ability to review thousands of pages in hours. I remembered sitting there, the client's voice on speaker thanking us, thanking me. That was the day I knew I hadn't wasted my life. Now with SpaceX, we were no longer the quiet disruptor. We were on the map. I could almost see the article. Forbes would run the headline in bold above a photo of me in a navy blazer, arms crossed, standing in front of our Houston office. NovaTech Legal Solutions, the quiet giant behind SpaceX's legal operations. I could see Mom clipping the article, her hands trembling, a little unsure how to process what she was reading. I could hear Dad clearing his throat, trying to find the words to cover the years of dismissive comments. Madeline would be getting ready that morning, straightening her blazer, checking her makeup, rehearsing her lines, not knowing that when she walked into that glass building, she would be walking into my world. For years, I stayed silent, working in the shadows, letting them believe I was lost. But sometimes justice comes quietly, wrapped in the sound of your own footsteps as you walk into your office, head held high, ready for the world to finally see. Sometimes justice comes late, but it comes. Madeline had always been the pride of the family, the one who never stumbled, never questioned the path laid out for her. She walked through life with a certainty I used to envy, her law degree from UCLA hanging on Mom and Dad's wall like a trophy they could point to during dinner parties. She worked at one of those shiny law firms downtown, the kind with glass walls and marble floors, the kind that made people nod in approval when you mentioned it. Meanwhile, I was the reminder of what they considered failure, the daughter who quit law school, the one who didn't follow the plan. They never saw the nights I spent building something real while they praised Madeline for her promotions and her neat little life. I was sitting on the back porch, letting the evening air cool the heat that still clung to my skin from the afternoon when Madeline found me. She slipped out through the sliding glass door, closing it softly behind her like she was stepping into a different world for a moment. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, not really waiting for my answer before pulling out the chair beside me. I shrugged, taking a slow sip from my water, watching the last bit of sun dip below the fence. She glanced at me, her face glowing from the lights strung up around the patio, her lips curled in that confident smile she always wore. "Rachel," she started, leaning forward a little. "I know things haven't exactly worked out the way you wanted." I turned my head, looking at her, but said nothing. She kept going, her voice soft, but filled with that unshakable certainty. "I just want you to know I'm rooting for you. I really hope you find something stable, something that fits." She meant it as kindness, I think, but it felt like a soft punch to the ribs. I nodded, letting her believe I appreciated it, letting her feel like the good sister for offering me encouragement. She smiled, relieved, then straightened up, excitement lighting her eyes. "I didn't tell you the best part earlier." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I got a call back from NovaTech," she said, her voice bubbling with pride. "They were really impressed with my application. It's a senior position and they're expanding so fast. It's the perfect next step." She paused, watching me for a reaction, her eyes searching for the envy she expected to find. I let a small smile touch my lips, nodding. "That's great, Mads." She laughed lightly, brushing her hair behind her ear, confident and satisfied. "I know, right? It feels like everything I've worked for is finally aligning. They're doing huge things over there." I leaned back, letting her words settle, letting her continue in her bubble of triumph. She kept talking about her interview prep, how she was planning her answers, what she would wear, how this would position her perfectly for partnership in a few years. I listened, letting her voice fill the quiet, noticing the way she glowed under the string lights, the way she believed with every fiber that she was walking into her destiny. Inside, I felt something unexpected, something I hadn't felt in a long time when it came to Madeline. Not anger. Not jealousy. Pity. Because she didn't know. She didn't know the company she was bragging about was mine, that the role she was preparing for would lead her to sit across from me. She didn't know the world she was so eager to join was one I had built brick by brick, line by line of code, sacrifice after sacrifice. She didn't know, and for the first time I felt free from needing her to know. Madeline's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it, smiling as she typed a quick reply, her fingers moving fast. She stood up, giving my shoulder a light squeeze, the gesture almost maternal. "You'll get there too, Rachel. Don't give up." I nodded, hiding a small laugh that threatened to slip out. She walked back inside, her head high, the door closing softly behind her. I stayed there letting the quiet return, the stars blinking above me as the last of the day's heat faded from the boards beneath my feet. I pulled my knees up to my chest, resting my chin as the cicadas hummed in the dark, filling the silence Madeline left behind. Inside, I could hear laughter, forks clinking on plates, the easy comfort of a family that believed everything was exactly as it should be. I closed my eyes, remembering the day I told Mom and Dad I was leaving law school. Dad's face had gone red, the vein in his temple pulsing as he paced the living room, hands clenched. "No, Morgan has ever quit anything. Rachel," he'd shouted as if the family name would crumble because I refused to live in a courtroom. Mom had just stood there, her arms crossed tight, her eyes hard. "How do you expect to survive without a real plan?" I did survive. And more than that, I built something they could never understand, something that mattered. But none of that would ever be enough for them because it wasn't the plan they chose. A mosquito landed on my arm, and I brushed it away, the sharp sting grounding me in the present. The back door creaked open, and I turned my head as Madeline stepped out again, hugging her arms against the breeze. She walked over and sat down, glancing at me, a small smile on her lips. "You're always out here alone, you know that." I gave her a small shrug. "It's quieter out here." She looked down at her hands, picking at her nail polish, before glancing back up at me. "I meant what I said earlier," she continued, her voice softer now. "I really do hope you find something steady, something that makes you happy." I let the words hang there, studying her face under the porch light. She believed it, truly believed she was helping, that she was being kind. "I know," I said quietly, taking a breath. Her shoulders relaxed, and she nodded, the tension leaving her posture as if she had completed a duty she set for herself. "I think NovaTech will be the place for me," she said, her eyes lighting up again, the confidence sliding back into place. "They're doing incredible things. I've been reading about them, their tech, their growth. They're exactly the kind of company I need to be at to move up." I watched her, the way her excitement bubbled out in every word, her hands moving as she spoke, painting a picture of a future she was so sure was waiting for her. "They're expanding into space law. Did you know that?" she continued, her voice quickening. "They just signed a huge deal with SpaceX. I can't even imagine being part of something like that." I nodded, letting a small smile touch my lips. "Sounds like a big step." "It is," she said, her grin wide, her eyes shining with that glow she always carried when she talked about herself. "And they're impressed with me. They said my background is exactly what they're looking for." She laughed lightly, leaning back in her chair, looking up at the stars. "This is it, Rachel. This is what I've worked for." I looked at her, seeing the little sister who used to follow me around the yard, clutching a stuffed rabbit, begging me to push her higher on the swing. Now she was a grown woman, so sure of her place in the world, so certain that she was untouchable. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not resentment. Just a soft ache of pity for how hard she was trying to prove herself to everyone, never once stopping to wonder what she truly wanted. Her phone buzzed, lighting up her face as she picked it up, her smile widening. She typed quickly, her thumbs flying, before glancing at me with a teasing smile. She stood, slipping her phone into her pocket, brushing off her jeans. "Get some sleep, Rachel," she said, reaching over to give my shoulder a light squeeze. "Tomorrow's a new day." She turned and walked back inside, the door closing softly behind her, leaving me in the quiet once more. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the screen lighting up with a new message from Madeline. "Hey, quick question," it read. "Do you know anything about NovaTech? I hear they're about to explode." The clock on my wall glowed 11:02 p.m. as I stood by the window, looking out at Houston, the city lights blinking against the dark sky like quiet promises. My phone buzzed in my hand again, Madeline's name lighting up the screen. I hesitated, taking a breath before answering, letting the line open with a soft click. "Hey, Mads," I said, keeping my voice even. "Rachel, you're up," she said, her voice bright but edged with a nervous energy I recognized immediately. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, watching a red tail light streak down the highway far below. She let out a small laugh. "Same here. Big day tomorrow." "Yeah," I said, letting the silence fill for a second. "So I know you've done some tech stuff," she continued, her words careful, trying to sound casual. "I was wondering if you could give me a few tips for tomorrow. NovaTech is big on innovation, and I want to say the right things." I let out a slow breath, the corners of my mouth twitching. "Sure. What are you thinking of focusing on?" She started talking fast, her words tumbling over each other. They asked me to prepare thoughts on how tech can streamline legal processes, maybe ideas on contract automation or client onboarding. I've read up, but you've always been good at explaining these things simply. Her praise was unintentional, a slip in the armor she always wore. You should talk about how AI can handle first-pass document reviews, I said, shifting to sit on the edge of my couch. Emphasize accuracy and time saved for clients. Show them you understand the balance between tech efficiency and human oversight. She hummed in agreement, and I could almost see her nodding, pacing in her apartment, her notes spread out on the coffee table. That's good. Really good, she said. And maybe I can mention client confidentiality in cloud systems. Exactly, I said. And be ready to explain how you'd handle client resistance to new tech. They'll want to see you can manage change. She scribbled something down, the faint scratching of her pen echoing softly through the line. You know, Rachel, she said, pausing, you're really smart. I wish you'd find something steady. A place where you could use that brain of yours for something secure. I looked out at the city again, the skyline sharp under the moonlight, the quiet hum of cars in the distance. I'm doing okay, I said, letting the words settle. I know, she said, but I could hear the disbelief under her words, the soft pity she didn't even realize she carried. There was a pause before she continued, her voice lighter now. Who knows, maybe once I'm in at NovaTech I can keep an eye out for you. They probably need people in support or admin. It would be good for you, Rachel. Steady hours, benefits. I let out a quiet laugh, not unkind, shaking my head as I rubbed my thumb across the edge of my phone. That's kind of you, I said, simply swallowing back everything I could have said. She didn't hear the edge in my voice, too wrapped up in the future she was planning, too sure she was helping. Anyway, I should let you sleep, she said, letting out a long breath. Big day tomorrow. Yeah, I said softly, letting the word hang. Thanks, Rachel, she added, her voice warm, grateful, still so unaware. Good night, Mads, I said. Good night. She hung up, and the quiet returned, the glow of the city lights washing over the room as I stood there, phone still in my hand. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone to my chest for a moment, letting the weight of tomorrow sink in. I opened my eyes and placed the phone on the coffee table, its screen going dark against the reflection of Houston's lights in the window. The quiet felt heavier now, wrapping around me as I moved to the kitchen, pouring water into a glass, letting the cold bite against my fingers. My mind replayed her voice, bright and sure, listing the points she would highlight, the way she would smile, the way she would walk into NovaTech like it was already hers. She didn't know she would see me first. I carried the water back to the couch, sinking into the cushions, pulling my knees close as I stared out at the blinking lights across the skyline. My phone buzzed again, lighting up with a new message. Thanks again, Rach. You're the best. I didn't reply. Instead, I let my mind drift back to when we were kids, Madeline in pigtails always asking me to tie her shoes before we ran out to the yard to chase fireflies. She always wanted to follow, always wanted to catch up, until one day she didn't need to anymore. She became the golden child, the lawyer, the perfect daughter, the one who fit the mold so well it became her skin. I let her have it. It was easier that way. My eyes drifted to the file folder on the table, the NovaTech logo stamped on the corner, Madeline's resume inside, the one she didn't know I had read hours before she called. I saw the words she had carefully chosen, the way she framed her work, the lines she blurred to make herself look bigger in the room. She was good, but not as good as she believed. I pulled the folder closer, flipping it open, scanning the lines I had already memorized. Strong but untested. Confident but not prepared for the questions I would ask. And she would be sitting across from me tomorrow, watching as I asked them. The thought pulled a strange ache through my chest, a mixture of sadness and something like relief. Relief that I no longer needed her approval. No longer needed to prove my worth against hers. Sadness that she still needed mine. I closed the folder, pushing it aside, letting it fall against the coffee table with a soft thud. The city lights blurred for a moment as I blinked, letting the emotion pass, letting it settle into the quiet that I had learned to live with. I stood and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass, watching the reflection of myself in the dark. 36 years old, CEO of a company about to close another round of funding, about to sign new contracts that would shift entire industries. And tomorrow, I would sit across from my sister, the golden child, as she tried to prove herself in a world she didn't know was already mine. I turned away from the window, letting the lights of Houston fall behind me as I headed to bed, the echo of her voice still in my mind. Maybe I can get you in too, Rachel. Something steady. I lay down the sheets cool against my skin, pulling the blanket up to my shoulders. Tomorrow, I thought, closing my eyes as the quiet swallowed the last of the city's noise. Tomorrow, I will be the one interviewing my sister. The elevator doors slid open on the 38th floor, the morning light pouring across the marble floors of NovaTech. Madeline stepped out, navy blazer sharp against her frame, a leather folder clutched in her hand, her heels clicking with confidence. She was scanning the lobby, her eyes bright with nerves until they landed on me. And stopped. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, confusion flashing across her face as she took a hesitant step forward. Rachel, she whispered, her voice cracking as she tried to keep it steady. I didn't move from where I stood near the glass wall, the skyline of Houston stretched out behind me. Good morning, miss. Hayes, one of my team, called as they passed, nodding respectfully before disappearing down the hallway. Madeline's eyes flickered at the greeting, her brows pulling together as she looked back at me. I gave her a single nod, letting the moment stretch, letting the weight of it settle between us. This way, I said, turning and walking toward the main conference room, the sound of my heels echoing against the polished floor. I didn't look back, but I could hear her following, her steps slower, now measured, the confidence she wore like a second skin starting to crack. Inside the conference room, sunlight poured across the long table, the chairs arranged neatly, the screen displaying the NovaTech logo glowing softly. I walked to the head of the table, setting my notes down, letting my hands rest on the chair before pulling it out and sitting. Madeline stood in the doorway, frozen, her eyes wide, her fingers clutching the folder so tightly her knuckles were white. Please have a seat, I said, my voice calm, even the tone I had used in every high-stakes meeting I had led. She stepped forward, her movements stiff, lowering herself into the chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I studied her, the way her shoulders rose and fell with each breath, the way her eyes darted around the room before landing back on me. What is this? She finally managed, her voice small. I tilted my head, letting a breath pass before answering. I'm Rachel Hayes, I said, meeting her eyes directly. CEO of NovaTech. Her face strained of color, her lips parting as she tried to form words that wouldn't come. But you said. She stammered, her voice cracking as she clutched the folder closer to her chest. I never said I wasn't building something, I replied softly, but my voice held firm. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening as she blinked rapidly, fighting to hold her composure. I turned to the screen, clicking the remote, pulling up the first slide of the interview agenda. We'll proceed, I said, letting the tone shift back to the CEO who ran this room, who commanded this space. Madeline nodded, but her hands were shaking as she opened her folder, flipping through her notes with trembling fingers. The first few questions were easy ones I gave to every candidate, letting them find their footing. She answered, but her voice was unsteady, her eyes flickering to me with every word, searching for something she couldn't find. Then came the technical questions, the ones about integration, about automated review, about security layers. She tried to answer, but the words tangled, her confidence slipping as she stumbled, the polished phrases from her resume falling apart under the weight of real questions. I read about it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes pleading. I understand the basics, but I watched her, letting the silence grow, letting her feel it, the truth settling between us in the space her words couldn't fill. She lowered her eyes, clutching the folder to her chest, her breath shaky as she tried to compose herself. I looked at her, at the sister I once protected, the one who used to ask me to fix her ponytail before school, the one who now sat across from me, undone by the reality she wasn't ready to face. She lifted her eyes to mine, the question there silent but loud in the room. She didn't look away. Her lips parted, trying to form words she couldn't find, her breathing uneven as the silence stretched. Her fingers twisted in her lap, eyes darting around the glass-walled room, searching for an escape that wasn't there. It's just... She started, her voice hoarse. They always said I was the one who had it together. I tilted my head, letting her continue. They told me to be the example, she whispered, her nails digging into the folder still pressed against her chest. I had to get the grades, get the job, get the life. She laughed to sound sharp and broken. And I did. I did everything they asked. Her eyes lifted to mine, glistening. But I don't even know if I wanted any of it. A sharp ache pushed against my ribs, the memory of sitting alone in that Plano apartment flashing in my mind, coding until dawn while they celebrated her every small achievement as if it were proof they were good parents. "Madeline," I said softly, keeping my voice calm, "you don't have to prove yourself here." Her breath caught her chin, trembling as she shook her head. "But I do. Don't you get it, Rachel? If I don't get this, if I don't keep moving up, then what was the point of all of it?" I exhaled slowly, the weight of years of silence pressing on my shoulders. "Is this what you want?" I asked, letting each word land. She froze, blinking fast, her mouth opening and closing. "What if I don't know?" she whispered. The vulnerability in her voice pulled something deep inside me, something that had long stopped expecting this honesty from her. Her eyes dropped to the table, tears landing on the wood, dark circles spreading as she tried to wipe them away quickly. "I don't want them to see me fail," she choked out. "I can't let them see that I don't have it together." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Failing doesn't mean you're broken, Madeline." Her eyes snapped up, anger flickering behind the fear. "Easy for you to say. You don't care what they think." She didn't know how wrong she was, how many nights I lay awake wondering if I was making a mistake, if I was letting them down. I cared, I admitted, my voice quiet for a long time. She swallowed hard, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Then why didn't you tell them?" I paused, letting the words form carefully. "Because I needed to know who I was without their voices telling me." Madeline let out a sob, clapping a hand over her mouth as her shoulders shook. She took a shaky breath, lowering her hand, tears streaking her makeup, eyes red. "I don't know who I am without it," she whispered. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air, the morning sun warming the glass, the light catching the tears on her cheeks. The confident sister was gone. In front of me was a woman, scared, tired, desperate to be seen. I opened the folder she had dropped, glancing at her resume, the lines she had highlighted to impress, the words crafted to look bigger, stronger, more certain. "You're smart," I said calmly, "and capable." She looked at me, blinking, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "But you're lost," I added gently, just like I was. She pressed her lips together, her breath catching, her hands trembling on the table. "Madeline," I said, letting the pause draw her eyes back to mine, "do you really want this job?" I watched her, the moment stretching, her pupils shaking as they met mine. "Or do you just want them to finally see you?" She stared at me, breathing hard, tears sliding down her cheeks as the question settled between us. The conference room was quiet, only the hum of the city outside, the clock ticking softly on the wall. Madeline's lips trembled. "Cheer. Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice cracked raw, her eyes searching mine for something she didn't know how to ask for. "Why did you hide this from me?" she whispered, clutching her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. I leaned back, letting out a slow breath, feeling the years of silence pressing against my ribs. "You never asked," I said softly, keeping my eyes on hers. She flinched, her shoulders jerking, pain flashing across her face. "That's not fair." I tilted my head. "Isn't it?" Her mouth opened, closed, frustration mixing with hurt. I thought you were lost." She let out a short, bitter laugh, wiping tears from her face with the back of her hand. "I thought you were the failure." I stayed quiet, letting her words echo in the glass room, letting them land. Madeline shook her head, her eyes red, her breathing ragged. And I walked around so sure of myself, thinking I was better, thinking I had it all together. She looked away, blinking hard. I judged you. I judged you every time we sat at that table and they asked you what you were doing with your life." Her voice broke, a sob catching in her throat. "And you just sat there letting me think it." I swallowed, feeling the sting behind my eyes, the memory of every family dinner where I smiled while they praised her, where I let them think I was nothing. "It was easier to let you believe it," I said quietly. Her head snapped toward me, anger and pain flashing. "For who, Rachel? For who was it easier?" I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. "For me, for you, for them." She let out a choked sound, half laugh, half cry, wiping tears that kept coming. "Do you even love what you do?" I asked softly, watching her face. Madeline froze, her eyes widening as if I had struck her. I I don't know, she whispered, her voice so small it barely reached me. She sank back in the chair, shoulders slumping, her hands falling into her lap, palms up empty. I hate it, she said, the words tumbling out quick, sharp. I hate law. I hate the pressure. I hate that I can't breathe, that I have to smile and pretend I'm perfect. Her face crumpled as she covered it with her hands, her sobs muffled against her palms. I'm so tired, she whispered, her body shaking as the words broke free. I stood, moving around the table, kneeling beside her, placing a hand on her arm, feeling the tremble under her blazer. You don't have to live their dream, Mads, I said, my voice low, steady, meant only for her. She dropped her hands, tears streaking her face, eyes swollen, looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. But if I don't, she said, her voice cracking, then who am I? I held her gaze, letting the question hang, knowing I didn't have the answer she wanted. Her shoulders shook as she took a shuddering breath, wiping her face with the sleeve of her blazer. I don't want this job, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I don't know what I want. I squeezed her arm gently, feeling the truth of her words, settled deep in the quiet between us, the world outside, moving on while she finally let herself stop pretending. She wiped her eyes again, her breath coming out in shaky bursts, trying to gather herself. I don't even know who I am if I'm not the perfect one, she whispered, staring down at her trembling hands. I sat on the edge of the table, letting the soft hum of the air vents fill the quiet between us. You don't have to be perfect to be loved, I said, my voice calm. She let out a short, bitter laugh, shaking her head. Tell that to Mom and Dad. I tilted my head, watching her. Have you ever told them what you really want? She glanced up, her eyes wet, confused. I don't know what I want. The truth in her voice was like a crack in glass spidering out until the image she'd built shattered. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, keeping my eyes steady on hers. Then maybe that's where you start. Madeline shook her head, tears falling again, dropping onto her skirt. They'll never understand. I exhaled, remembering every dinner where they praised her internships, her GPA, her career moves, while I sat silent, letting them believe their story about me. They might not, I admitted, but that's not your fault. She sniffed, swiping at her tears. I thought I was helping them. Making them proud. You did, I said softly. You've done that your whole life. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of years pressing down. But I'm so tired, Rachel. I reached out, taking her hand, feeling how cold it was, how small it felt in mine. You don't have to carry it anymore, I told her. Her lips trembled, her eyes glistening again as she squeezed my hand back. But if I stop, what do I have left? I paused, letting her words sit, feeling the fear inside them. You have yourself, I said, my voice quiet but firm. And that's enough. She broke, sobs tearing from her as she leaned forward, hiding her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. I moved closer, pulling her into a hug, feeling her sink into me, her tears warm against my shoulder. We stayed like that, the office around us quiet, the city outside alive, while she finally let herself fall apart. She pulled back, wiping her eyes, trying to catch her breath, her face blotchy and wet. I don't want this job, she whispered, her voice raw. I nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Okay. But I don't know what I want. Instead, she said, her eyes searching mine. I held her gaze, letting her see. I wasn't judging, letting her see that I understood. Then let's figure it out, I said. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, her hands still shaking as she wiped her cheeks. For the first time in years, she looked like Madeline, not the version she played for everyone else. The door to the conference room was still closed, the world outside waiting, but in that moment it felt like time had stopped for her to breathe. She squeezed my hand again, her eyes soft, scared but open. Okay. And I knew as I held her hand that this was the moment her real life would begin. That evening we pulled up to the old brick house together, the porch light already glowing against the darkening Texas sky. Madeline sat in the passenger seat, staring at the front door, twisting her fingers in her lap, her breath uneven. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, her voice small. I glanced at her, letting a soft smile touch my lips. You just tell the truth. She let out a shaky breath, nodding once before we stepped out, the gravel crunching under our shoes as we walked up the familiar steps. Mom opened the door before we could knock, her face lighting up, her arms reaching for Madeline immediately. Sweetheart, there you are. Madeline hugged her back, stiff but trying, as Mom pressed a kiss to her hair. We stepped inside, the smell of pot roast and rosemary wrapping around us, the familiar hum of the old ceiling fan turning slowly above. Dad was at the table, glasses low on his nose, reading the newspaper with his coffee, his routine never changing. "Girls, you're right on time," he said without looking up. We took our seats at the table, the plates already set, the pot roast steaming in the center, everything looking exactly like it had every Sunday for years. Mom poured iced tea into glasses, her eyes bright. "Madeline, how was your interview, honey? I'm sure you impressed them." Madeline's hand froze on her napkin, her eyes darting to mine, her throat working as she swallowed. The room grew quiet, the only sound the slow tick of the clock on the wall. I set down my fork, letting out a slow breath. "It went differently than you think." Mom's brow furrowed, confused. "What do you mean?" I met her eyes, calm, steady. Madeline wasn't the only one at that interview. Dad lowered the newspaper, his eyes narrowing. "Rachel, what are you saying?" I took a breath, letting it fill my lungs before speaking. "I'm the CEO of NovaTech, the company Madeline interviewed with." The words dropped into the room like a stone in water, the ripples immediate. Mom's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth, tears instantly filling her eyes. "No. Rachel, that's not possible." Dad's face went red, his jaw tightening, the vein in his neck pulsing. "This is some kind of joke." "It's not," I said softly. Mom grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she pulled up the Forbes app, scrolling quickly, her breath catching as she found the article. She pressed a hand to her lips, tears slipping down her cheeks as she read aloud, her voice trembling. "NovaTech secures $50 million SpaceX contract under CEO Rachel Hayes." Dad's hand dropped to the table, the newspaper falling to the floor, forgotten. Mom turned to me, tears streaming, her voice breaking. "Rachel, why didn't you tell us?" I held her gaze steady, feeling years of silence, years of letting them think what they needed to think. "Because I didn't need you to validate who I am." The truth settled like dust in the room, no one moving, no one speaking. Madeline took a shaky breath, stepping closer to the table, her voice trembling. "Mom, Dad, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore." Mom's head snapped toward her, eyes wide. "What, Madeline, don't say that." Madeline's chin shook, tears in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "I never wanted this. I did it for you. For both of you." Dad opened his mouth, but no words came, his shoulders slumping as he stared at the table. Mom's face crumpled, tears spilling, her hand reaching for the edge of the table as if to steady herself. The pot roast sat in the center, steam curling up untouched, the silence louder than any argument we had ever had in this house. Madeline wiped her tears, her voice soft but clear. "I don't know what I want yet, but I know it's not this." And for the first time, no one tried to argue. Dad's shoulders slumped as he leaned back, the weight of his expectations folding into the silence. Mom reached for a napkin, dabbing at her tears, her lips trembling as she tried to find words. The forks on our plates lay untouched, the pot roast cold, the smell thick in the room. Madeline glanced at me, her lips pressing together as she tried to steady her breathing. I gave her a small nod, letting her know she didn't have to fill the silence anymore. Mom's voice broke as she finally spoke. "Maddie, we only wanted you to have security." Madeline's eyes flickered, sadness and exhaustion crossing her face. "I know, Mom." She folded her hands on the table, the knuckles white. "But I've been living your dreams, not mine." Dad rubbed a hand over his face, his wedding ring catching the light, his eyes downcast. "You think we did this to hurt you?" he asked quietly, his voice rough. Madeline's shoulders shook as she let out a breath. "Number, I know you thought you were helping." She looked at both of them, her voice gaining strength. "But I'm not happy." The words were simple, but they cracked something open in the room, the truth echoing between the four of us. Mom's hands trembled as she set the napkin down, her eyes meeting mine, glassy and red. "Rachel, why didn't you tell us about NovaTech?" I inhaled, letting the air fill the space in my lungs that had always felt tight around them. "Because you never asked," I said softly, holding her gaze. Her lips parted, a small sob catching in her throat as she looked away, her shoulders shaking. Dad reached for the printed copy of Forbes beside his plate, his eyes scanning the article again, the headline bold beneath my photo. He swallowed, the sound loud in the quiet kitchen as he lowered the paper, his eyes meeting mine. "I didn't know," he whispered. I nodded. "I know. The old clock on the wall ticked each second, stretching as they absorbed the pieces of the daughters they thought they knew. Madeline reached across the table, her fingers brushing Mom's hand. "Mom, I don't want to do this anymore." Mom's tears fell again, dripping onto the tablecloth, her hands clutching Madeline's. "Then don't, baby." Madeline's face crumpled, relief and fear mixing in her eyes. "But I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." I reached over, placing my hand on top of theirs. The three of us connected, the warmth steady. "You figure it out," I said, keeping my voice calm. "On your terms." Dad let out a shaky breath, his eyes softening as he looked at Madeline. "And we'll try to understand." Madeline's tears came again, but her smile was small, real, breaking through the exhaustion. Mom's hand lifted, brushing a tear from Madeline's cheek, her lips quivering. "I'm sorry we didn't see it." Madeline closed her eyes, leaning into Mom's hand, her breath steadying as she let herself be seen. For a moment, it was quiet, the four of us sitting there, the clock ticking, the cold dinner forgotten. Then Dad reached for his water, his hand still shaking as he took a sip, setting the glass down carefully. He looked at me, his voice low, resigned. "You built something incredible, Rachel." I nodded once, the years of silence between us no longer heavy. "Thank you." He picked up the Forbes article again, reading the last line, his eyes lingering on it. Setting it down, he let out a breath, his shoulders dropping as he finally lifted his eyes. And for the first time, there was no lecture, no questions, no defense, just the truth sitting quietly in the room as Henry Carter lowered the paper, his eyes tired, his voice gone, with nothing left to say. The quiet in that kitchen felt like the first honest breath any of us had taken in years. Madeline let out a slow sigh, wiping her eyes with the edge of her sleeve, her shoulders dropping as if she had just put down a weight she'd carried for too long. Dad set the paper aside, rubbing a hand over his face, the lines at the corners of his eyes deeper in the soft light above the table. Mom pressed her lips together, twisting her wedding ring, blinking hard to hold back the tears that kept coming. No one moved to clear the dishes or pretend that dinner could continue. We just sat there, letting the truth settle around us like dust in sunlight. I reached for my glass of water, taking a sip, the coolness grounding me as I glanced at Madeline. She met my eyes, her lips pulling into a tired, real smile, the kind that comes when there is nothing left to hide. "I'm glad it's over," she whispered. I nodded, the edges of my own lips curling upward. "Me too." Mom let out a soft sob, her hand pressing to her mouth as she turned toward Madeline. "Oh baby, we didn't know," she choked out. Madeline's eyes softened, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I know, Mom." Dad cleared his throat, looking down at the table, his fingers drumming once before falling still. "You did good, Rachel." The words were quiet, almost lost in the hum of the old refrigerator, but I heard them, every syllable sinking in. I nodded once. "Thank you, Dad." He lifted his eyes, meeting mine with a mix of regret and something like pride. We should have asked." Mom reached across the table, her hand shaking as she touched mine, her skin warm, fragile. "You're incredible, honey." I smiled softly, squeezing her hand. "I'm still me, Mom." Tears fell down her cheeks as she nodded. "I know. I see that now." Madeline leaned back, letting out a small laugh through her tears, the sound breaking the tension, softening the room. "God, I don't even know what comes next," she said, swiping at her cheeks. I chuckled, taking another sip of water. "That's the best part." She tilted her head, her brows pulling together. "Is it?" I nodded, letting the truth warm me from the inside out. "Yeah, it really is." Dad pushed back his chair, standing slowly, the years showing in the careful way he moved. "Girls, we're proud of you," he said, his voice low but clear. Madeline let out a small sob, covering her face with her hands as she cried, but this time it was a cry of release. Mom wrapped her arms around her from the side, holding her close, tears streaming down her own face. I watched them, my heart aching and healing all at once, the years of distance closing in the softest way. Dad stepped around the table, resting a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, steady. "Thank you for taking care of your sister," he said quietly. I looked up at him, the man who had taught me how to ride a bike, who had checked my oil before every road trip, who had never known how to say the words I needed. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "She's my sister." His lips pressed together, his eyes shining. "I know." For a moment we stood there, the four of us, surrounded by cold dishes and the fading smell of rosemary, the past heavy but no longer unbearable. Madeline lifted her head, her eyes puffy but clear. I want to figure out what I actually love. Mom cupped her cheek, smiling through tears. And you will. Dad nodded, his hand still on my shoulder. We'll give you the space to do that. Madeline looked at me, her lips trembling into a soft smile. You are right. I tilted my head, smiling back. About what? She took a breath, steady, free. That there's more to life than making them proud. And for the first time I truly saw her as she began to discover who she could be. 6 months later, the Houston sun was already warm on our faces as we sat outside a small cafe, the morning air filled with the scent of roasted beans and fresh bread. Madeline tucked her hair behind her ear, a soft breeze lifting the loose strands as she sipped her iced coffee. I can't believe I used to dread mornings, she said, her eyes following a young couple walking their dog down the street. I smiled, stirring a packet of sugar into my coffee. Life looks different now. She nodded, a small, peaceful smile touching her lips. I'm different now. We sat in a comfortable silence, the city waking up around us, car engines humming, a cyclist ringing his bell as he passed. I start the new workshop next week, Madeline said, her voice calm but excited. Teaching legal tech to the teens. I raised my brows, a warm pride filling my chest. They're lucky to have you. Her eyes flickered, a softness there I hadn't seen before. I'm lucky to have this chance. She leaned back, looking up at the clear sky. I spent so long trying to live up to an idea that was never mine. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth of the coffee match the warmth in my chest. You're not alone. Her gaze came back to me, the morning light catching the gold flecks in her eyes. What about you? I let out a quiet laugh. I finally used my real name on the scholarship fund. Her lips parted in surprise before her smile grew wide and genuine. Rachel Carter. About time. I grinned, shrugging. It felt right. She reached across the small table, squeezing my hand, her fingers warm, steady. You did it. We did it. I corrected, giving her hand a gentle squeeze back. She pulled her hand back, brushing a tear from her cheek as she laughed softly. I think Mom and Dad are finally getting it. I nodded. They're trying. Therapy helps. Madeline smirked. Dad in therapy. I'm still getting used to that. I laughed, the sound blending with the chatter from the cafe behind us. A lot can change in 6 months. She let out a breath, looking around as if seeing everything for the first time. I feel like I'm actually living. I tilted my head, studying her. You are. She looked down at her coffee, her thumb tracing the rim of the cup. Thank you, Rachel. For what? I asked, genuinely curious. For showing me there's more to life than making everyone else happy, she said, her voice soft but certain. A breeze passed, lifting a napkin off the table, and I caught it, setting it back down as we both laughed. Across the street, a bus pulled up, kids hopping off with backpacks, their voices bright in the morning light. Madeline watched them, her smile, small but full. They don't know how good they have it. Maybe they will, I said, taking another sip, letting the moment stretch. We didn't need to say anything else. We sat there, sisters equals free in a way we had never been before. The sun rose higher and I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on my skin, the freedom in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't proving myself to anyone. I was just living. Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments.